Hey, and did you know I'm currently accepting new patients in New York, offering both in person and telehealth visits? And I also provide telehealth for patients in Michigan, with North Carolina coming soon. And I also offer coaching, both intimacy coaching and menopause coaching, nationally and internationally. So look us up on www.femvhealth.com. I am an American board certified OBGYN, a mom, a Muslim, and I'm talking about sex. This is the Muslim Sex Podcast. Welcome to the Muslim Sex Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Sadaf, and this episode is everything you need to know about what a young Muslim man needs to know before marriage about women's health. And I know that's a big ask, but let's see what we can do. But before we get into it, I want to make a few things very clear. Of course, this is not meant to be any type of medical advice. If you have any questions about your health, make sure you go speak with your healthcare provider. And as always, this is no advice on religion. So if you have any questions about your religion, make sure you go speak with your friendly neighborhood religious leader. This is the Muslim Sex Podcast because I just happen to be a Muslim woman that talks about sex. So today I'm super excited to have on with me again one of my favorites. He's and I'm a little biased because he's my son, Zayaan Hussein. And so, Zayaan, for those people that may not know who you are, right? And I've never listened to the podcast, maybe missed the last episode you were on last year. It was around this time when you were in between your freshman and sophomore year, and now this year it's between your sophomore and junior year in college. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah. Well, first off, Dr. Lodi, or Mom, thank you for having me back on. It's always great to be back. I just kind of give a bit of an introduction about myself. Yeah, I'm Zayaan. I'll be a junior in the fall. Wow, at college. I'm an engineering student, and yeah, I'd say outside of everything academic wise, I really enjoy I enjoy reading, I enjoy cooking. So those are some of my other interests or passions beyond just the engineering related things.
And also watching Nick Nolan movies, right?
Yes, of course.
All right, for all those ladies, young women out there, he does like to cook, and he's pretty smart kid.
Thanks,
So
Mom.
anyway, so last year you were on the podcast as a teenager, and now you're not a teenager anymore. So what's changed most about how you think about relationships now that you're, getting older?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as time goes on and I see all of these people around me kind of going through life and exploring things, I feel that, the way that my sense on relationships has changed has kind of been more one of like, I think I've started to understand relationships to be almost like teamwork. As I'm very grateful to have, two very great parents at home, both mom and dad. And
You
so
have to say that because he's on the podcast.
Yeah, I mean, super grateful to have mom and dad at home, and they're able to exemplify a very good teamwork and team bonding relationship. But having seen, maybe some of my friends at school go through, relationships that may have been maybe more one-sided than others, or one where there's not, almost an equivalent exchange of experiences and knowledge, and even things like words of affirmation. Like I think those things have really kind of solidified my belief in the teamwork and that kind of nature of relationships, and how it's not one person more than the other, or one person less than the other. It's kind of like maybe like a fluctuating balance where two people always add to a sum of 100. Like some days maybe one person's down at like 30% of the normal output, then someone
A
else is
true engineer who's bringing in math
gonna
to our relationship. That's great, Say.
Yeah,
No,
I mean, there's always going to be natural fluctuations, but as long as at the end of the day, it kind of evens out. I think that's kind of what I've been able to take away from everything.
very cool. So what are young men your age actually talking about when it comes to dating, marriage, and intimacy?
Yeah, I think, when it comes to guys around my age, like, the people that I tend to surround myself with, they're very kind of, in the environments that I'm a part of, where a lot of us are very pre-professional and, focused on careers and everything like that, we're looking for people that are also very aspirational with us. And, a lot of people that are around my age seem to kind of be looking for people that they're able to spend time with, that they're able to kind of share experiences with, but people that are also, driven to kind of have not similar lifestyles as them, but have the drive to want to be able to do things. And so I think something that's really kind of stood out for me is the fact that, like, when I've seen, say, some of my other guy friends, maybe they're talking to a girl or something like that, and maybe she says something like, oh, like I'd be happy, like, watching TV for the rest of my life. Obviously this is a lot of you know uh, an extreme example, but, like, I find that sometimes with some people my age, that's been something that kind of has dissuaded them from pursuing a relationship because it doesn't necessarily align with their ideals or what they believe in. So I think that's kind of a lot of what I've seen personally within some of my friend groups.
Yeah, but I wonder if, like, your cohort of friends perhaps are maybe a little bit more driven, and so maybe like the guys and the girls that you hang out with are more driven than perhaps, let's say, somebody else's, right? So maybe somebody else is looking for somebody that would just be at home and take care of kids, and which there's nothing wrong with that. I think that all jobs are very admirable, and I think that one of the hardest jobs, actually, I think, is motherhood and being at home with your child 24/7. I think it is so difficult because I tried it postpartum, and let me tell you, I just couldn't do it. I mean, I needed that, like, adult connection. I needed to do something else besides, um, feed my kids and change their diapers and stuff like that. And it's funny because on the weekends, that's what we would do. Dad and I would just feed you guys and change your diapers, and literally felt like that's all we did all weekend long. And so it was, working actually outside of the home for me was really, like, therapeutic because it was using my mind and doing something else besides, like changing diapers, which is not bad, but I wanted something a little bit more. Do you think your generation is more open to discussing sexual health than previous generations?
Yeah, I mean, I would totally say that. I think a lot of things that may have previously been considered like taboo. I know you talk a lot about, like, things that people historically haven't wanted to talk about. I think nowadays, people are very open. At least, my group of friends have been very open about, one or the other things, whether it be regarding, intimacy or relationships. I think that there has been almost like a breaking down of the walls that used to kind of keep people siloed into, like, almost like shame. I feel like that kind of has, like, gone down to where it's not like, people are saying outrageous things, but they have the confidence to come forward and say the things that they need to say, or explore topics that they want to learn more about. So I really think that those trends have been a very big motion within my generation, and I think maybe I'm a little biased because I have a mom who's very progressive and very vocal about a lot of things, but I think that it's a good thing. And I definitely encourage the, moving forward of this kind of culture.
So where do you think young people are getting most of their information about sex and relationships? And do you think it's reliable?
I'd honestly say, like, right now, a lot of
TikTok?
stuff is found through, yeah, TikTok, short form content. I think, those first 3 seconds after scrolling onto a new reel, like those first 3 seconds, if they can just say something like outrageous, someone's gonna be like, wow, like, I need to listen to this. And
Mm.
then you get them for the next, like, the next minute or so throughout that reel. But I think a lot of times people are getting a lot of their sexual information through these reels. I mean, obviously, like, that's the accumulation of knowledge over time. I think if there's something on a deeper level that someone needs to know, they're obviously going to know to, go seek professional medical help.
AI?
Oh, well, I mean, AI as well, but I think a lot of people said that, the utilization of doctors and, talking to someone who really knows what they're talking about is not gone on people. I think people really do understand that, like, these doctors spend a lot of time going,
A lot of time.
learning
Mhm.
about their specific field. And so I think that's not lost on a lot of people. But I would definitely say, like, the little tidbits of information that are accumulated over time are definitely found through, like, short form content like TikTok or Instagram Reels.
Hmm. So what do you think young Muslim men wish they had learned growing up but never did?
It's tough to kind of see that because, you don't know what you don't know. And I've been very blessed to grow up around a very progressive and inclusive family. But I think, when it comes to, I think something that really is large within the Muslim community is this sense of like sheltering. And that's not to say necessarily sheltering is a bad thing, but I think that, the real world has or like the world that a lot of Muslim men my age enter is not the same as, what may be presented to them in Islamic school, or, if they go to an Islamic, K through 12, like something like that. It's not going to be the same as if they, it's not going to be the same when they go to, let's say, a 4-year institution or community college, or as they go on in their lives, whether it be like, employment or anything like that. I think it's important for young men to learn, you know, what they, how to properly understand people around them. I think empathy is a very important skill to have, and I think that, being able to understand even like sexual health, and I think that, my understanding of women's health is small. It's nowhere near as good as, my mom or any other women. But I think I start to have a more of an understanding or more of an appreciation than I think a vast majority of people do. And I find that because I do have that understanding, or I do have that baseline level of knowledge, I'm able to understand and empathize with people more. And so I think that that's something that, Muslim men my age need to kind of understand as well, or at least I think a lot of them wish they grew up with.
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah. I mean, I think that, like just reflecting on, when I was growing up, right? So, in our communities, we don't talk about sex at all, ever, really. And even when I approached, one of these big organizations to present at one of their conferences, I was like, shot down like, no, this is, we're not going to talk about this, it's taboo, whatever. And I felt that it was really unfortunate because it's not like we're living in a box, right? It's not like, I mean, things are still going on around us. There's a whole world outside. You can't, and I agree with you, you can't shelter people. You can't say that, it's not okay for you to learn about a woman's body. It's not okay for you to learn about, different things which are very pertinent, right? Like if you grow up and you never really, like, for example, you don't have any sisters, right? But if you never learned about, the menstrual cycle, or you never learned about midlife, or you never learned about, the changes that a woman goes through, right? You wouldn't know what to expect when hopefully one day, you get married and have your own family and stuff like that, and if you have daughters, you wouldn't really know what to expect because you never were taught that, you never learned it. It wasn't something that you grew up around, right? So I think that, sheltering people so much is really not a good idea. And in fact, I did a podcast with one of my guests. I do a lot of podcasts. So one of my guests that had come on, and I think she and I were talking about like how really just, Islam has this fantastic tradition of passing down stories, right? Through oral history and things like that. And so and she made a very profound comment and I love it. And she said, if we are not passing down knowledge, then we are by default passing down ignorance, right? Which I think is so true because I think that, and a lot of times, sometimes we're not able to pass down knowledge because we don't know, or we maybe, maybe our parents didn't know, right? So they weren't able to pass it down to us because how could they? They didn't know. But when you know, then it's your responsibility. And really, like, in Islam, there, education is really, held up to a very high level, right? Like it's education is very, very important in Islam, right? In fact, one of the first word that was ever said to the Prophet, peace be upon him, by the angel Gabriel was what, Zay?
It was read.
Was read, of course. Yes, read. So, I mean, it's so important, and it's so important in just, Islamic history. And, Muslims have done so much when it comes to like math and astrology, astronomy, you name it, medicine, engineering, architecture. I mean, Muslims have been there. They've been doing these things. And so it's really, really important to pass down knowledge because when we know it, then, we need to pass it down to the next generation. So, how has studying biomedical engineering, Zay, changed the way that you think about the human body or medicine?
So I think this is probably most applicable with, a class that I took. It's a class in biomedical fluids. And so this class really taught me a fair bit about, how things transfer throughout the body and how, even small things like plaque buildup on arteries can cause like a larger issue over time because of the way that blood flows. And of course, I completely remember now, like, one of my favorite classes this past semester was a physiology class. And in that class, I learned about basically all the systems within the body and essentially, how they're all connected. And I really think that's really interesting. And I think it, ties in pretty well with a lot of what you do, Mom, especially how, like, the hormones can go to like how you perceive things and how everything else is linked and how like as women go through menopause bone density decreases. There was actually a specific graph that was shown to us in that physiology class where we were talking about osteoporosis, and there's a steep decline on the women's side of things, and our teacher points out, she says like this is exactly around when menopause starts. And I was like, oh my god, like Mom talks about this all the time. And so I think having that appreciation for the physiological side of engineering and engineering for human health has really kind of helped me think a lot, but it's also helped me see the parallels between how everything that you talk about, Mom, is linked, and how important a lot of things that have not historically been talked about, especially women's health, are to a very wide range of people.
Yeah. So, what qualities do you think make someone a good husband beyond simply being a good provider, Zan? I'm just trying to get like a male perspective.
Well, I mean, going off of my biggest male role model, my dad, I think a lot of it has to do with compromise, right? I mean, a lot of things maybe you don't want to do them, or maybe you see things differently. But I think an important part of everything is communication. I think that to be a strong husband and to be a strong person within the household, you need to be able to kind of communicate and also be a good listener. I think listening, like everyone talks about communication, but I don't think the skill of listening is talked about enough as well. When you are able to kind of sit down and listen to everyone, let's say you're sitting with us, like our family of five, alhamdulillah, you're sitting down and everyone has something to say. Like, I'm sure you've heard all of everything that we have to say sometimes, but I think sometimes, when you're able to sit down and say, okay, like, the youngest brother, like let him say something, and then the middle one, let him say what he has to say, and let me say what I have to say, and then let Mom say what she has to say, and then let Dad say what he has to say. Like if everyone's able to listen, you can kind of take different parts from different things that people say, and kind of put together this harmonious idea that aims to make everyone a little bit happier, or at least a little happier than they would be if only one person's idea were to be picked. So I think the skill of communication, being able to say like this is what I think, is good, but it's almost a little too self-centered to where you have to kind of consider the broader group in which you're operating to really be a good husband and a good co-head of household.
Yeah. So, what do you think emotional intimacy means, Zay?
Well, emotional intimacy, I think, really has to do with the like understanding. I think from anecdotes that I've heard or read about online, a lot of times, no two women are the same, in the sense that something that works for one woman might not work for another one, even if they're even related somehow or something like that. Like everyone has different medical conditions and underlying psychological conditions and medical conditions, and I think emotional intimacy is having patience and understanding and sympathy for someone who may be going through something a little differently from previous experience or anything like that. So I think emotional intimacy is kind of being able to kind of like take a breath and kind of listen to some, like once again it comes back to listening, right? Listening to someone else and seeing their perspective and understanding, okay, this is what someone else feels, how can I help them, or how can I you know do my best to benefit them in another way. I think it goes beyond serving your own interests, and kind of helping someone else grow with you. And I think that's kind of what it takes to be emotionally intelligent. And I'm sure, if you ask me this question in another year, I'll have a completely different answer. But from my life experience so far, that's my take on it.
Yeah. So emotional intelligence is a little bit different than emotional intimacy. So, we talk about different forms of intimacy, and I think that that was a great answer. Intimacy, there's physical intimacy, there's emotional intimacy, intellectual intimacy, experiential intimacy, right? Intimacy is like the bond that you create with somebody. So emotional intimacy, is having that connection with a person before physical intimacy. So a lot of people, a lot of women want that emotional connection with somebody before they go and have a physical connection with them, and something that brings the person together, right? So it could be, creating that emotional intimacy could be taking a walk together, holding hands, giving a hug, giving a kiss, something like that, that creates a bond, something that makes people come together. So that's, a little bit of what different types of emotional intimacy could be, right? And people, and there is definitely emotional intelligence as well. Emotional intimacy is just something that, may help bring people closer together. So why do you think so many men, Zay, struggle to talk about emotions?
I think a lot of it has to do with the way that men are perceived throughout society. I think this is this. I'm going to give an example here, but I think it's important to contextualize that example with saying that what's echoed on social media is oftentimes some of the most, like, it doesn't represent the wide variety of people or wide population of people as a whole, and social media is designed to almost spark outrage or spark interaction with content. So oftentimes the most, not outrageous, but the most interesting parts of discourse are shared. Now, with that being said, I think one thing that I've noticed is that a lot of times there are some creators online that will post and say, your man is not a real man if he cries or he talks about his feelings or he does anything historically or traditionally related to having that kind of emotional expression. And so I think so many men are scared of being perceived in a certain way that they don't that is not necessarily favorable to what society deems to be, a successful man or an intelligent man or a winning man. That they don't want to necessarily say those emotions because they feel like it almost makes them, in the eyes of others, makes them less than. And I think as time has gone on, we've seen the rise of other creators that have this almost hyper idealized notion of masculinity, where almost like we turn back to this essence of like traditionalism, where like the man is the sole provider, and like you go back to almost like the Neanderthal idea of like being a hunter and gathering and providing for everyone. I think people misconstrue that as like I have to be like a strong force, and I can't show emotion because that shows weakness. And I think while some ideas are good, and having the want to be able to provide for your family, I think that's a great thing to have and a great characteristic to have. But I think that there is something to be said about the ability to balance both the strong sides of being a man, or like the societally seen strong sides of being a man, but also sides that make you human and showing emotion and showing that you care about things. I think that's a lot of times the perception of how people may see you, and what could change over time. I think that's really what scares a lot of people, and I think that with time, those things can maybe hopefully start to be a bit more like worked on, or kind of we can help people understand that like this is not the only way to do things. So I think that's possibly I think that's why a lot of men are necessarily are kind of hesitant to kind of share their feelings or have that sense of almost emotional vulnerability.
So if one of your friends came to you with questions about, let's say, intimacy or marriage, what advice would you feel comfortable giving, and where would you know your limits?
So I think to give almost like an example from my time here, like there's a good friend of mine. I've known this friend of mine for, I don't know, fourth grade and on, and he was dating this girl for a long time, and they recently broke up when they went to college after a year or so of long distance, and so for a while what I kind of brought to him, like I was like, you got to think about it from a couple aspects, right? Like, I think a relationship, like, you shouldn't be holding anyone back in a relationship. I think it's meant to help people grow and develop as people. So I think that that's something that we kind of talked about, and I was like, like, but like, you got to think about, like, you've grown a lot as a person since you started dating this girl, and you have to think about, like, what's best for the both of you. And so I think, if someone asks me a question about a relationship or something like that, I think the way that I try to view it is like, I think a relationship should be almost like a friendship, but with, deeper ties. Like, you don't like a relationship should not be so special to where, like, you feel like you can't just treat this person as your best friend. Like, I think, your partner should be like, your best friends and you can talk to all the time. And I feel like, almost if it feels like it's turning into a chore to maintain that relationship or keep that kind of spark alive, I think that it takes a second to think, is this the right decision for me, or have I changed over the past, 4 years to where, like, maybe it's better to not necessarily move on, but to reconsider where a lot of my values lie. And I think that's, specifically pertinent towards when you're younger or when you're my age. This friend of mine started dating this girl when he was, what, 16, and now he's 20. And so a lot can change in those are very formative years. And I think a lot can change, but that's not to say, the second that you start disaligning with your partner, you start to feel like, things aren't what they used to be, you should just leave them. I think that the first area that you can try to, change things or improve things has to do with communication. And, I think it has to do with, seeing where people's different heads are and how you can try to fix things first before you just get up and leave. I think, having that strong connection, a 4 year long connection is no joke. That's a lot of time invested, and I think, it's obviously worth it to go forward first and, say, like, here's what I'm feeling. Here, how are you feeling? This is what I think has happened. This is what I want to try to fix. I think those open lines of communication can really help. And I think that's kind of how I advise my friend to go about things. And so I think, now he's made a good decision for himself and their relationship. And I think, going forward, I'll try to provide that advice where I can. And I think, maybe areas where I wouldn't be as comfortable would probably be things, closer to the religious side of things. I'm a proud Muslim man, but I don't consider myself to be a scholar. So when it comes to the true religious teachings and the sunnah of the Prophet, peace be upon him, I think that's a point where I would definitely say, I think you should talk to the imam, or I think you should talk to someone else like this, who has like a proper textual understanding of a lot of these, a lot of the way that things are done religiously. So I think that's kind of where I would set the boundary to be.
Yeah. So what happened with that relationship, Zay? Did they split up? They stay together? I mean, like, you brought it up and then you just dropped it. Like, what happened?
Yeah, so they ended up splitting up, and they ended things on pretty amicable terms. And they still see each other every now and then, but I think they've been able to kind of realize that they've developed a lot as people, and even things like one of them goes to school on the West Coast, one of them goes to school on the East Coast. Things like that. Like, you change a lot, even in those college years, and who you're surrounded by and the culture you're surrounded by. I think really ends up changing and shifting who you are as a person. And I
Wow.
think, in the end, I think they found a good resolution for them both, and they're still able to be on good terms and grow together as people, but
Yeah.
not in under a relationship pretext.
Sure, sure. So what expectations do you think young men have about marriage that might be unrealistic?
I actually I've heard this, stat quoted a bit on social media. So, I don't know if someone's going to be listening to this and fact checking me, but if so, don't come after me. I'm trying to give the proper forewarning here. But I've heard a lot that, women within marriages, especially with kids, I think people traditionally think, oh, like a lot of these duties would be split 50-50. But it's actually been seen, or at least within these studies that have been quoted, that a lot of times women end up doing a vast majority of the work that has to be done, whether it be around the house or with the kids. Or I know you, mom, you had mentioned, like, changing diapers and doing a lot of things. Like, apparently, according to this one study, and of course that's not indicative of the entire population as a whole, but maybe a certain subsect, or a random controlled amount of people, that a lot of times women are doing a lot of the work. And so sometimes I feel like, as we've gotten more progressive as a culture, women are almost seen as, like, they're going to be in the workforce, but then they're also going to go home and take care of household duties. And I think that, while I don't see this necessarily within the group of people that I hang out with, I definitely see that this is a trend that's been seen within, some other groups of people. And so I think that, an unrealistic expectation is that, things will not be split 50-50, and, like, a woman will take care of a lot of the household related things, which I don't think is fair. And I think, should be definitely split a lot more 50-50. And even if it's not 50-50, say, days where the husband is more free, maybe he should take care of more things around the house. Or maybe where the wife is more free, she should try to take care of things around the house. But as long as it averages out to be an equitable split of things, I think that is important.
I said, going back to math.
Yeah, I mean, as long as marriage is, as I mentioned before, like, marriage is it's a partnership, right? It's not you do all these things and I'll do these things. It's how can I help you? How can I make up for some of the things that you're not able to do today? How can you help me with some of the things that I'm not able to do today? It's a partnership striving towards an eventual goal. So I think those are some of the things that may have traditionally been seen as like women's duties, but I think that it's not fair to say that anymore. And I think that it's important for men to also take up things around the house as well, in areas where men may have historically not been seen as
Yeah.
present.
So before I became a menopause specialist, Zay, what did you know about menopause?
Oh my God. I mean, nothing really. Like, before you started, your whole journey with the Muslim Sex podcast and your own private practice and doing a lot of stuff on women's health. Like, a lot of stuff that I learned in health class has to do with very short term dated things. A lot of coming of age things and puberty, and like a lot of sexual health related things, and those kinds of diseases. But I knew very little about what happens towards the midlife of women's health. And so I think, I really appreciate the knowledge that you've been able to instill within me of what it's like to be an aging woman, and how to best take care of women as they go through things like menopause and perimenopause. And even something as simple as, like, I didn't even know how early perimenopause would start, right? Like, you think about, like, oh, like, menopause probably happens somewhere around, like, the midlife period or whatever else. But, like, that's not true for everyone. Some demographics experience it earlier, some experience it later. But that perimenopause stage, where things are starting to, I don't know if the correct term would be slow down, but, like, I think that time it's so impactful, and there are so many things you can do to kind of mitigate the side effects of that time period that I totally would not have known. And maybe I wouldn't have gone out and tried to search for them until maybe it was too late. And so, I that's a very long-winded way of saying that I knew very little about the menopause space before you were teaching me about it.
Yeah. Well, as you are learning that, yeah, perimenopause can begin as, early as a woman's late 30s. Some women that experience menopause, which is no bleeding, no menses for a whole year, can have it. If they have it less than the age of 40, that's considered premature ovarian insufficiency. If they go through menopause before the age of 45, then that's considered early menopause. And but the typical age for somebody to go through menopause is around the age of 51, 52. But we know that perimenopause is the time of hormonal fluctuation. And so that varies based on ethnicity, and different ethnicities go through perimenopause for different lengths of time. So Caucasian women, it's about 7 years. African American women, it's around 10 years. Hispanic women, it's 8.9 years. South Asian women, it's between 8 to 9 years. Asian women, it's about 5 years. And so perimenopause is a time right before menopause. And that's where they have this hormonal roller coaster is what we call it. So it's really the estrogen that is going up and down. And there's a slow decline of both progesterone and testosterone because our ovaries make estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. We get a little bit of testosterone from the adrenal glands as well. But estrogen and progesterone and testosterone, once a woman no longer has periods, those three hormones really go down. And the one that plays the biggest impact in a woman's body is estrogen, and we have estrogen receptors from our head to our toes. So absolutely, it affects a lot of things. Did growing up with me change your understanding of women's health?
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. Of course it did. I think compared to what my friends know or what I think they know, I think I know a fair bit more about women's health. Not to say that I'm an expert at all, but I definitely think that I have more comfort, especially around seeking out information around women's health. And I know that I have a great resource at home, and so I can ask you stuff. But in the event that maybe there's other things I need to find out, I know for example, places that I could try to find research or information on it. And I know that a lot of these things that women have are very real things that they have to face. And so I think definitely growing up with you has impacted my view of women's health and how to best care for all different types of situations.
Yeah. So let's say your future wife told you she wasn't feeling like herself in her 40s. How would you respond?
Well, I know that the 40s is a time where you could be going through perimenopause, and so at that point, I'd say
Would you say talk to my mom?
yeah, yeah. I would definitely say talk to my mom, but in that case, definitely maybe it's worth seeing like a concierge doc who's able to spend like a good amount of time with you to really walk through all these things that you're feeling. Because especially with what I've noticed is having been to the hospital a couple times, and these hospitals are very much attuned to see the most amount of patients in the least amount of time. And so I think especially as private equity begins to not begins, but has a lot of exposure towards the healthcare industry and insurance and everything else like that. I think, having the exposure that I have to finance as well, I kind of understand that, like, what they want to be able to bring in or increase that top line. And what increases that top line is a large volume of patients. And so I think a lot of, smaller, maybe boutique and concierge offices are able to, kind of sit down and really understand and see you as a whole person as opposed to an isolated issue. And so, as I mentioned earlier, like even within physiology classes, right? Like, the entire body's connected. And so, even within like say sports medicine, when I, used to swim a lot or when I get sore after lifting, like, the whole body is connected. And so, an issue at the shoulder can lead to something at the hip, which leads to something at the knee, right? Like, so everything like that it's all connected. And I think it's important to see, or see a doctor that is able to see you for the whole system that you are. So I think, to go back to your original question of, if my wife was experiencing issues, I think it's important to see a doctor that's really, specialized and certified in these kinds of things. Maybe it starts off with a generalist visit, internal medicine. Maybe it's a gynecologist visit or an OBGYN visit. And then from there, if you kind of get the sense that you're, maybe it's time for you to see a specialist, then yeah, maybe it's time to see a concierge doc, see a specialist that's able to kind of put together all the symptoms, kind of weave them all together.
Yeah. So, I guess that just follows really nicely into the next question, which is that does it surprise you that hormones affect mood, sleep, libido, memory, and energy?
Oh, definitely not. I like, if you kind of think about it from like almost like the movie Inside Out, right? Like I've heard that movie be pretty well claimed for the job that it does in kind of explaining how emotions and hormones work. I think you're able to see how those things, when joy, for example, is gone, like that's a very transformative time. And I think that it gives it some insight as to how hormones really impact the way that you feel day to day. It's not surprising at all that like things like hot flashes or memory losses or like like brain fog are caused by this this imbalance or this loss of certain hormones. So yeah, I think it's not surprising at all. But to touch back on something you said earlier, like I don't know if I ever would have thought about that if it weren't for, you and your presence in my life. And so I think it's important for people to know about that and kind of get the education and knowledge out there.
Okay, Zay, I'm going to give you some statements and you tell me whether or not they're true or false. Okay, Zay?
Oh my God. You didn't give me a study guide for this. I wasn't expected to be tested today.
Yeah, well, now you have a little test. So, menopause only causes hot flashes. True or false?
Oh, that's got to be false. I feel like there's definitely more than just that symptom. I mean, I know brain fog exists. Like, come on, I literally just mentioned that, so that has to be at least more than one thing.
100% menopause. There's so many symptoms, right? Like joint pain and heart palpitations, and there's a lot of stuff that happens. But your hair loss, dry eyes, itchy ears, all that stuff. Okay, so women lose interest in sex because they don't love their partners anymore. True or false?
No, that's definitely false. I mean, we just talked about how much hormones and libido can be, changed up by menopause and perimenopause. I think when your hormones are definitely all out of whack, the last thing, it's hard to understand what your own body is doing to you, and so in that confusion, it may be hard to kind of, it's not that you don't love your partner any less. It's just that you don't understand yourself as much anymore. And so I think there's definitely a level of normalization that you can kind of try to restore again. But I think it's an ever growing game of how can I adapt to the current situation I'm in. But to kind of answer the question, I definitely don't think that it doesn't mean you love your partner. I just think it means that you have to figure out yourself a bit more.
That is amazing, Zay. That is way better than I think a lot of men that are husbands that have women going through menopause. And I think that that just shows that you've really been listening to me doing my reels.
Yeah.
Because, yeah, no, I mean, so many men, oftentimes take it personally that, their wives aren't attracted to them anymore or that they, don't like them. But as we just talked about, right, we know that testosterone goes down. Testosterone is responsible for libido. And so if your ovaries are going to stop making testosterone and it goes down, then obviously that's going to affect your libido. But also, a lot of women will experience pain with sex, right? And that happens due to, problems with lubrication or the tissue changes and all of that stuff. And so, when things hurt, nobody wants it, right? And so, all of those things are super important to know and to understand. So tell me this, Say, we literally just talked about this. So I guess this is a good quiz for you. Menopause always happens at the age of 50.
Oh, no, no. I mean, it's variable depending on a bunch of different factors, right? I mean, whether it be ethnicity or maybe it's your lifestyle. I'm sure stress probably has to play a part in it, right? So even things that your day to day can possibly, accelerate or decelerate your rate at which you're going to experience menopause.
Yeah, and also, like some women, for example, they have cancer, right? So if they've gone through chemo or radiation, of course, it's going to affect your ovaries and cause them to shut down. Some women have had a surgical menopause where they've had to have their ovaries removed. So, they experience menopause earlier. So lots of reasons why, menopause can happen earlier than the age of 50. We talked about early menopause. We talked about premature ovarian insufficiency. So all of those things can affect it. So tell me this, hormone therapy is dangerous for everyone.
No, definitely not. I mean, I know like there's been studies in the past, right, that put like a black box, what was it, black box label on like estrogen, I
Black,
believe it was.
yeah, yeah, black box
Right,
warning.
where they would say like, oh, estrogen can cause, I believe it was cancer.
Yeah,
And
breast cancer.
so,
Mhm.
yeah, exactly. And so, time like that creates this notion or this like conversation that, oh, like this stuff is dangerous. We can't ever touch it again. But, recent studies have shown that that's not the case, right? So I think, hormone therapy is important and it has to be done. I think there's important emphasis on it has to be done right. You have to be seeing a good doctor and you have to be understanding, what's going on and making sure you're getting constant updates with like your vitals and your metrics. I think it's important to kind of track all these things. But from what I've heard from you, hormone therapy can be extremely beneficial and completely turn around a woman's life or their relationship or things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So hormones definitely change women's lives, and we know that. And, I talk about vaginal estrogen, and Alan can tell you about that too. But so vaginal estrogen, I say all the time, it changes relationships and it changes lives. And one day it will end all world wars. It will cause world peace. That's what vaginal estrogen will do.
I have
Um,
some wishes.
I'm just kidding. But it may, you never know. Vaginal pain is just something you have to deal with. If true or false?
That's false. I mean, I know there's a wide variety of things that you've referred to before. I think you've talked about your practice having referred people to, let's say, like a pelvic floor therapist or things like that. Like I think from the brief bit that I've heard about you say something like vaginismus, like that's not something it's not something that you want, but it's not something that's incurable. It's going to take a lot of work. I mean, anything with physical therapy is going to take work, but it's something that can be worked on over time. And so, no, in no way is pain necessary for anything. And I think that, I think that as long as you work towards a goal and you have a goal of what you want to get to, and you're willing to take, put in the work to get there, I think that you're definitely able to get past the or not get past, but kind of confront the pain where it is and kind of work from there.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, so, we know that pain with sex is never normal. So, for anyone listening to this podcast, if you have pain with sex, you should absolutely go and get evaluated by a doctor that knows sexual medicine so that we can help you out. It might be like in sclerosis, it might be like in planus, it might be, the tissue, it might be the gender urinary syndrome, menopause, it could be postpartum, when the hormones, when the estrogen is low, if somebody's breastfeeding. It could be due to, hormonal fluctuations. And that's why, decreased estrogen affects the tissues, affects the lubrication. And so there could definitely be pain with sex. So pain with sex is never normal. Make sure you get it checked out, and vaginal estrogen for the win. So, Zay, why do you think conversations about intimacy are still so uncomfortable for a lot of people and, especially in Muslim families?
I think conversations are uncomfortable because it requires being open, right? A lot of people, I think perception plays a big role in this, right? And so let's say you're facing an issue within like your intimate life. It may be scary to kind of come forward with that information because it requires you to be almost like an open book. And so I think that it requires someone to be there and understand you. And I feel like some people would rather sometimes have this idealized version of themselves or this impression of themselves that they're fearless and everything for them is perfect. I think social media is a great example of this, where you only see the highlights of someone's life in social media. And so when you start talking about struggles that you have, especially within something that's so intimate and so private as like your sex life or your sexual relations, like I think that it gets uncomfortable because you have to be there and be present and say, like, I have this issue and I need to figure out how to solve it. But for some people it's very scary to kind of face that because, as I mentioned, like you have to be there and be open and kind of have and know that someone else is looking.
Vulnerability,
Yeah,
right?
it's the vulnerability aspect of it, right?
Yeah.
And so I think, as a society, we need to be comfortable being vulnerable and comfortable being, being a little bit out of our comfort zones. I mean, everyone talks about, coming out of your comfort zone, but I think a lot of times when people think about it, it's like, oh, like, I need to be ready to speak up and get like a new promotion or something like that, or I need to be able to speak up for myself. But it's also has to do with, you know, speaking up for yourself isn't just in a professional aspect or not, and not just in like a friendly aspect, but it's very pertinent in relationships and what you need. So I think that is kind of why that side of things is so kind of hard to open up about. And I think, you mentioned in Muslim families as well. I think that whole idea of Muslim families and this idea that has been pushed upon the Muslim community of being, so conservative and not being able to talk about these kinds of things, it's perpetuated, especially if you look online at say maybe certain Muslim content creators. They almost enforce this idea of being like traditional and being conservative, and you have to do this, that, and the other. And whether you like it or not, subconsciously it's being impressed upon you. And so I think it takes active thought to realize, hey, like what some people are saying may have some sort of merit to it, but it's important to also realize that communication and being in vulnerability is important to having a constructive relationship over time. Things change, and it needs to be talked about.
So tell me this, how can parents do a better job preparing their sons for marriage, not just their daughter, for healthy marriages? What can parents do?
Well, I think it's twofold, right? It's I've talked about this a little bit earlier, but it's communication and listening. But I think it's also instilling the curiosity almost to learn more, right? Like men's health and women's health are two distinct things, but they have overlap on each other, especially within marriage, right? Like I know we speak a lot about right now on this podcast, we've spoken a lot about women's health, but men's health, men will also need probably some help somewhere down the line. And I think it's important for someone to if something doesn't feel right or something isn't right, it's not like you're not admitting defeat and getting, a checkup or a consultation. It's not admission of defeat or admission of anything else like that. And so I think that's important to instill upon, men to kind of understand that it's not a bad thing to go see a doctor. It's not a bad thing to go talk about your issues. And I think, on the other hand, when you're entering marriage, you're entering a partnership with a woman. And so being able to understand her and once again having that curiosity to kind of learn more about women's health, right? Like women's health is not like it's not going to affect me as much as it's going to affect inshallah my wife. And so for me to kind of go out there and say this thing maybe this issue may be facing my wife, I think it's important to kind of sit there and listen and say how are you feeling, how can I help you, what do we need to go do, what do we need to see, who do we need to see to kind of help you live like the best life you can. I think it's important to kind of recognize that, and I think that would help Muslim men overall, specifically within marriage.
So, Zay, tell me this. Do you think young men want these conversations even if they don't always ask for them?
I think that's a difficult conversation because I don't think it's a difficult answer, but I think at the end of the day, like, yes, people want to have these kinds of conversations, but a lot of nervousness comes up around like, how do I bring it up in a, respectful, maybe, if it's a Muslim person thinking this, how do I think about it how do I bring it up in a Islamic manner? And so, I think that's an important way to kind of think about it, right? Like, I think these conversations are important and they're very pertinent, especially within relationships, but people may have some sort of nervousness around them. So I think at the end of the day, people definitely do want to have these conversations. It just takes some someone to maybe even bring it up to them for them to maybe have the ability to say yes to it. Like they may not have the confidence to bring it up, but if someone brings it up to them, they're able to like affirm that they need to talk about it.
Okay, Zay, so some rapid fire questions. I just need like a one liner.
Okay.
So, okay, biggest misconception guys your age have about women?
I think guys don't understand women because they don't. I think a lot of things can be resolved through like talking and understanding different points of view. I think a lot of understanding can be done through if you were to just kind of sit down with even like female friends, girls that you don't have like romantic interest in, and kind of ask them like how do you think about this? What do you look for in a person? I think that really
One liner, Zay.
I think that would help us. So yeah, I think that's it. I think communication helps resolve these kinds of issues.
Okay. One thing every man should know before getting married.
It's okay to talk and it's okay to be vulnerable.
Okay. A health topic every college student should understand.
Um, I think it's both sexual health and personal health. I think, being able to maintain yourself away from home is a very important skill to have.
Green flag in a relationship.
Open communication. I mean, I've talked about it a lot. I think that's like the cornerstone, like the foundation for a healthy relationship.
Red flag.
I think it's kind of it's twofold, but I think being withdrawn is almost a red flag. But you have to understand that like there are going to be waves where someone may be a bit more withdrawn, and that it's okay to give them that space. But I think if it's for like a period of a very very long time, that may be something you may want to discuss with your partner.
Best advice mom has ever given you.
You've given me a lot of advice. I think one that's really helped me propel myself to where I am now has to do with advocacy. I think advocacy for myself has been a very big part of propelling me to where I am now. And I know that you've helped me gain the confidence to kind of send those emails that say, like, hey, like, I'm here and I need this, that I think other people may not have the confidence to traditionally do. So I think self-advocacy has been a very big thing that you've taught me.
One thing I always say that turned out to be true.
You talk a lot about the first impression confidence. And I think, the more that I meet new people in college and things like that, the more I realize that, when someone's willing to go out there and kind of go up to you and introduce themselves, it gives you like a very positive impression of them. So I think, you talk about that a lot. I've seen it hold true very, very much so.
If every husband learned one thing about menopause, what should it be?
There's no set time for menopause to start. It can happen at any point in time. And I think the only way to really monitor it is to keep open lines of communication with your spouse.
And so if you could give one piece of advice to young men preparing for marriage, what would it be?
Do some research, right? Learn what it's like to kind of be with another person, and understand, like, everything's not always rosy. Like, there's gonna be challenges that you face, but those challenges make everything stronger. And so I think do some research and learn the issues that people have gone through in the past, and learn how to approach them and be open.
All right, Zay, last question. You've watched me dedicate my career to improving women's health and advocating for women in midlife. How has that shaped the kind of man you hope to become and the kind of husband you hope to be?
Well, I'll try to keep it in one line, but I feel like, this could definitely be like a multi-line answer. But I think it's shaped the person I want to be in terms of helping give me empathy. I think, the more you learn and the more you understand about people, the more empathetic you're able to be for them, and understand them more. I mean, I would have never really understood or known what to look for in midlife if it weren't for what you had taught me.
All right, awesome. Any last words, Zay, before we end this podcast?
I think it's just you got to be out there. You got to go out there. You got to do your best, and be sure to listen to people. I think you can learn a lot by listening to people, and you don't know what you don't know, and the only way you can figure that out is by listening to others.
All right, very good. Well, we are done here. And thank you, Zay, for coming on. I love having you on my podcast, and I know that there are lots of people that enjoy listening to our conversation. So thanks again for coming on. And well, we are done here, and it's been real and really intimate. And remember, this is not meant to be any type of medical advice. So if you have any questions about your health, make sure you go speak with your healthcare provider. And until next time, this is the Muslim Sex Podcast. So thank you for listening to the podcast, and make sure you leave us a review, share and like the podcast. And if you leave me a review, I'd love to shout you out on social media. So be sure that you share it with all your friends. And thanks for listening.